In the quiet corridors of Windsor Castle, where whispers of history still echo through ancient stone walls, Catherine, Princess of Wales, stood before a mirror that had once reflected the face of Britain's longest reigning monarch. The weight of tradition pressed upon her shoulders like an invisible crown, yet what she was about to do would forever change how the royal family honored their beloved matriarch. Just months after Queen Elizabeth II's passing had left the nation in mourning, Kate was preparing to host something unprecedented, a Christmas carol service that would not only celebrate the holiday season, but serve as the most personal tribute to the late queen that the royal family had ever attempted. This wasn't just another ceremonial duty. It was a daughter-in-law's heartfelt promise to keep alive the memory of a woman who had become both mentor and grandmother figure to her. As Kate adjusted the pearl necklace that had once belonged to the queen herself, she knew that every detail of this evening would be scrutinized, every gesture analyzed, and every musical note would carry the emotional weight of a nation still learning to live without their constant for over 70 years. The guests arriving tonight weren't just dignitaries and celebrities. They were people whose lives had been touched by Elizabeth II's quiet acts of service, her gentle wisdom, and her unwavering dedication to duty. What makes this story extraordinary isn't just the grandeur of the setting or the prominence of those attending. It's the deeply human tale of how love transcends death, how tradition can be honored while embracing change, and how one woman's vision could bring together a grieving nation in a celebration that would become legendary. This is the story of Kate's carol service, a night when music, memory, and majesty combined to create something truly magical. The idea came to Kate during one of those quiet September mornings when the world seemed suspended between seasons. She was walking through the gardens of Adelaide Cottage, her family's new home, when the memory struck her with unexpected force. It was something Queen Elizabeth had said during their last private conversation, just weeks before her passing. The Queen had been reminiscing about Christmas services at Windsor, her eyes twinkling as she described how music had always been her favorite part of the holiday celebrations. "Music speaks when words cannot, my dear," the Queen had told Kate, her weathered hands gently folding in her lap. "It connects hearts across time and space in ways that protocol and ceremony never could." At the time, Kate had simply nodded, appreciating the wisdom, but not fully understanding its deeper meaning. Now, standing in her garden, with the morning dew still fresh on the grass, those words resonated with profound clarity. The royal family was still navigating the complex emotions of their first months without Elizabeth II. King Charles III was settling into his new role with the dedication everyone expected, but the personal loss was evident to those who knew him well. William carried the weight of increased responsibilities while trying to shield his children from the intense public scrutiny. The entire monarchy was in a period of transition, learning to honor the past while stepping boldly into the future. Kate had always been acutely aware of her role as a bridge between the traditional royal family and the modern world. Since joining the family in 2011, she had carefully observed, learned, and gradually found her own voice within the institution. The Queen had been her most patient teacher, offering guidance through gentle suggestions and quiet conversations that took place away from the public eye. Now, with the Christmas season approaching, Kate felt a calling that went beyond mere duty. She wanted to create something that would honor the Queen's memory while also serving the British people who were still processing their grief. The idea of a Christmas carol service began to take shape in her mind, but not just any service. This would be different, personal, and meaningful in ways that traditional royal events sometimes struggled to achieve. She spent the following days sketching out ideas in a leather-bound notebook that had been a gift from William. The pages filled with thoughts about music, venue, guest lists, and the overall atmosphere she hoped to create. Kate had always been detail-oriented, a trait that had served her well in royal life. But this project felt different. It wasn't about following established protocols or meeting diplomatic expectations. This was about creating something from the heart. The first person she approached was William. They were having their usual evening tea in the sitting room of Adelaide Cottage, with the children finally settled for the night. The domestic tranquility of the moment made it the perfect time for intimate conversation. Kate had learned early in their marriage that William processed important decisions best when he felt relaxed and unhurried. "I've been thinking about Christmas," she began, setting down her cup with a careful precision that had become second nature after years of being photographed. "About how we might honor your grandmother's memory in a way that would truly reflect who she was." William looked up from the briefing papers he had been reviewing, his attention immediately focused on his wife. He had learned to recognize the tone Kate used when she was developing an idea that mattered deeply to her. Over their years together, some of her most meaningful contributions to royal life had begun with conversations just like this one. Kate outlined her vision for the carol service, describing her hope to create an event that would bring together not just the royal family and traditional dignitaries, but ordinary people whose lives have been touched by the Queen's service. She talked about featuring music that had personal meaning to Elizabeth II, about creating an atmosphere of warmth rather than formality, and about making the service accessible to those watching at home. She always said that Christmas was about bringing people together. Kate explained, her voice soft with emotion. "I want to create something that would make her smile, something that reflects her belief in the power of community and shared experience." William listened intently, occasionally asking questions, but mostly letting Kate share the full scope of her vision. He could see how much thought she had already put into the concept, and he recognized the careful balance she was trying to strike between honoring tradition and creating something genuinely new. The location was Kate's next consideration. Westminster Abbey, with its soaring Gothic architecture and centuries of royal history, seemed like the natural choice. The Abbey had hosted the Queen's coronation, her wedding, and countless other significant royal events. It was a place where the spiritual and the ceremonial intersected in ways that felt both majestic and accessible. But Kate wanted to ensure that the Abbey would feel welcoming rather than intimidating. She began working with the Dean of Westminster to understand how they might adapt the space to create the atmosphere she envisioned. The conversation revealed Kate's growing confidence in her role as a senior royal, as she articulated her vision with both passion and practical understanding of the logistics involved. The guest list became one of the most complex aspects of planning. Traditional royal events often followed established protocols about precedence and diplomatic considerations. Kate wanted to honor those traditions while also including people who represented the breadth of British society. She spent hours reviewing suggestions from various palace departments, but she also insisted on including her own research about individuals and organizations that had been particularly meaningful to the Queen. One of Kate's most innovative decisions was to invite key workers and volunteers who had served their communities with the kind of quiet dedication that the Queen had always admired. She wanted teachers, healthcare workers, community organizers, and charity volunteers to sit alongside members of Parliament and foreign dignitaries. The message was clear: service comes in many forms, and all should be honored equally. The musical program required equally careful consideration. Kate knew that the Queen had particular favorites among hymns and carols, but she also wanted to include pieces that would resonate with younger generations. She began working with accomplished musicians and choirs to create a program that would feel both timeless and contemporary. As October turned into November, Kate's notebook filled with increasingly detailed plans. She consulted with palace staff, religious leaders, security officials, and media representatives. Each conversation added layers of complexity to the event, but also reinforced Kate's conviction that the service could become something truly special. The Queen's former lady-in-waiting, Lady Susan Hussey, became an invaluable advisor during this planning phase. Lady Susan had served Elizabeth II for over 60 years and understood better than almost anyone what would have brought joy to the late Queen. Her insights helped Kate refine details that might have seemed minor to others, but would have been significant to Elizabeth II. Her Majesty always noticed the small kindnesses, Lady Susan reminded Kate during one of their planning sessions. She would have wanted everyone who attended to feel truly welcome, not just invited. This guidance influenced decisions ranging from how guests would be greeted upon arrival to the selection of readings that would be included in the service. As the plans developed, Kate found herself thinking often about her children and how they were processing the loss of their great-grandmother. Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis had enjoyed a special relationship with the Queen, one that had been carefully nurtured away from public view. Kate wanted the carol service to help them understand how their great-grandmother's legacy could continue through acts of love and service. The involvement of her children in the planning process became another layer of meaning for Kate. She shared age-appropriate details about the service with them, asking for their input on certain aspects and helping them understand why this tribute was important for their family and their country. By late November, the plans for the carol service had evolved into something far more comprehensive than Kate had initially imagined. What had begun as a simple desire to honor the Queen's memory had become an event that would showcase the very best of British tradition while pointing toward a more inclusive and accessible future for the monarchy. The planning process had also deepened Kate's understanding of her own role within the royal family. She was no longer the newcomer learning to navigate ancient protocols. She had become a leader in her own right, someone capable of envisioning and executing events that would have lasting significance for the institution she had married into. As December approached and the final details fell into place, Kate felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She knew that the carol service would be judged not just as an event, but as a statement about the direction of the modern monarchy. The success or failure of the evening would reflect on her personally in ways that felt both thrilling and daunting. The Queen's own words continued to guide Kate through these final weeks of preparation. Music speaks when words cannot. As Kate reviewed the final program, listened to rehearsals, and imagined the moment when the Abbey would be filled with voices raised in song, she felt confident that Elizabeth II would have approved of what was taking shape. The carol service would indeed speak when words could not, carrying messages of love, gratitude, and hope that would resonate far beyond the ancient walls of Westminster Abbey. The first snow of winter was beginning to dust the windows of Kensington Palace when Kate received a phone call that would transform her carol service from a royal event into a national celebration. The caller was Gareth Malone, the renowned conductor who had spent years bringing communities together through music. His voice carried the enthusiasm that had made him beloved by audiences across Britain. "Your Royal Highness, I've heard about your plans for the carol service," Malone said, his words tumbling over each other in his excitement. "I have an idea that I think might interest you, something that could really honor the Queen's belief in bringing people together." Kate had been reviewing seating charts in her study, but Malone's energy was infectious enough to make her set aside her papers completely. She had admired his work for years, particularly his ability to find and nurture musical talent in unexpected places. His community choirs had brought joy to housing estates, military bases, and workplaces across the country, proving again and again that music truly could transcend social barriers. Malone's proposal was ambitious and beautiful in its simplicity. He wanted to create a special choir for the carol service, bringing together singers from across the Commonwealth who had been touched by the Queen's reign. The choir would include children from schools that the Queen had visited, healthcare workers who had been honored for their service, and members of community groups that had received royal patronage over the decades. Imagine voices from Canada, Australia, Jamaica, and dozens of other nations coming together to sing in her honor, Malone explained. Not professional performers, but real people whose lives were made better because of her service. It would be like the Commonwealth itself singing as one voice. The idea resonated immediately with Kate's vision for the service. She had always been drawn to the Queen's role as head of the Commonwealth, understanding instinctively that this was where Elizabeth II's legacy was most personal and most powerful. The Commonwealth represented the Queen's belief in unity across diversity, in the possibility of different cultures and traditions coming together for common purpose. Within days of that phone call, Kate found herself coordinating with Commonwealth High Commissioners, community leaders, and musical directors across the globe. The response was overwhelming. Stories poured in from every corner of the Commonwealth about individuals who wanted to participate in this unprecedented tribute. From New Zealand came the story of Maria Tangaroa, a Maori teacher who had met the Queen during her final visit to Auckland. Maria had been leading a children's choir that performed traditional songs for the royal visit, and the Queen had spent extra time talking with the children about their heritage and their dreams. Maria immediately volunteered to bring some of her students to London for the carol service. Australia contributed the voices of the Bushfire Community Choir, a group that had formed in the aftermath of the devastating 2019 fires. Many members had lost homes or livelihoods in the disaster, but they had found healing through singing together. The Queen had sent personal messages of support to affected communities, and several choir members had been invited to Buckingham Palace during recovery efforts. From Canada came Indigenous singers who had participated in reconciliation ceremonies that the Queen had supported in her later years. Their willingness to travel to London for the carol service represented a complex but meaningful relationship with the Crown, one that acknowledged difficult history while embracing possibilities for healing. The Caribbean nations contributed gospel singers whose churches had been part of royal visits over the decades. Their powerful voices would bring a different energy to the traditional Anglican service, reflecting the diversity of worship styles across the Commonwealth. As these international participants began arriving in London, Kate made sure to meet with as many as possible personally. These conversations became some of the most meaningful moments in her preparation for the service. Each person carried stories about encounters with the Queen, memories that revealed aspects of Elizabeth II character that were rarely seen in official reports. Sarah Mitchell, a nurse from Wales who had worked during the pandemic and received recognition from the Queen, shared how a personal letter from Elizabeth II had arrived at exactly the moment when she was considering leaving her profession due to exhaustion and stress. Your Majesty wrote that she understood how difficult things were, and that she was thinking of all of us who were caring for others, Sarah explained to Kate. It wasn't just a formal acknowledgement. It felt like she really knew what we were going through. These personal stories influenced how Kate thought about every aspect of the service. She worked with the Archbishop of Canterbury to ensure that the liturgy would reflect not just Christian traditions, but the broader spiritual diversity represented by the Commonwealth. Special prayers were composed that honored different faith traditions while maintaining the essential Christian framework of the service. The music selection became increasingly sophisticated as more voices were added to the choir. Traditional carols like O Come, All Ye Faithful, and Hark, the Herald Angels Sing would anchor the service in familiar territory. But Kate also insisted on including Servant Song, a piece that had been written specifically to honor the Queen's dedication to service, and Commonwealth Carol, a new composition that wove together musical traditions from across the nation she had served. One of Kate's most personal decisions was to include The Lord's My Shepherd, a hymn that had been sung at the Queen's wedding to Prince Philip in 1947. The choice was both touching and strategic, reminding everyone present that the Queen's life of service had begun with a personal commitment made before God and witnessed by the world. The rehearsals at Westminster Abbey became events in themselves. Kate attended as many as possible, not as a distant royal observer, but as an active participant in the creative process. She offered suggestions about pacing and transitions, asked questions about the acoustics, and helped resolve the inevitable conflicts that arose when bringing together such a diverse group of performers. During one particularly memorable rehearsal, the combined choirs were practicing How Great Thou Art, one of the Queen's favorite hymns. As the voices soared through the ancient arches of the Abbey, Kate noticed that several participants had tears in their eyes. The emotion was contagious, spreading through the space until even the technical crew stopped their work to listen. "This is what she would have wanted," whispered the Dean of Westminster to Kate as they stood together in the nave. Music bringing people together, faith expressed through beauty, service honored through celebration. The guest list for the service continued to evolve as news of the Commonwealth Choir spread. Heads of government who had worked with the Queen during her reign asked to attend, but so did ordinary citizens who had been touched by her example. Kate worked with her staff to balance these requests while maintaining the intimate atmosphere she hoped to create. One of her most meaningful decisions was to reserve seats for young people from each Commonwealth nation. These weren't necessarily the children of dignitaries or celebrities, but students who had been identified by their communities as emerging leaders. Kate wanted them to experience the service as participants in the Commonwealth's future, not just observers of its past. The media attention surrounding the event was intense, but Kate had learned to use publicity strategically. She granted selective interviews that focused on the service's deeper meaning rather than its ceremonial aspects. When asked about her motivation for organizing the event, she spoke about the Queen's belief in the power of shared experience to build understanding and connection. Her Majesty always said that we are stronger together than we are apart, Kate explained to one interviewer. This service is meant to demonstrate that truth through music and celebration. It's about honoring her memory by living out the values she embodied. The security arrangements for the international participants required careful coordination with multiple agencies. But Kate insisted that the necessary precautions should not create barriers between the performers and the congregation. She wanted the service to feel welcoming and accessible, not heavily guarded and formal. As December progressed, the significance of what Kate was creating became increasingly clear to those around her. This wasn't just another royal Christmas event. It was a new template for how the monarchy might engage with the Commonwealth in the post-Elizabeth era. The success of the carol service could influence royal events for decades to come. The Queen Consort, Camilla, became one of Kate's strongest supporters during this period. As someone who had also married into the royal family and had to find her own voice within the institution, Camilla understood the challenges Kate faced in balancing tradition with innovation. Their conversations provided Kate with valuable perspective on how to navigate the complex expectations surrounding royal events. Prince William watched his wife's growing confidence with pride and admiration. He had seen Kate evolve from a nervous newcomer to a poised royal, but the carol service revealed new aspects of her leadership abilities. Her capacity to inspire others, to coordinate complex projects, and to articulate a compelling vision for the monarchy's future impressed even those who had worked with her for years. The children's choir rehearsals became particularly special events. Kate made sure to attend these sessions personally, sitting with the young singers and helping them understand the significance of their participation. She wanted them to feel proud of their contribution while also learning about the values of service and dedication that the Queen had embodied. Princess Charlotte showed particular interest in these preparations, asking detailed questions about the music and the participants. Kate used these conversations as teaching moments, helping her daughter understand how the monarchy could serve as a force for bringing people together rather than setting them apart. As the final week before the service arrived, Kate felt a deep sense of satisfaction about what had been accomplished. The carol service had grown from a personal tribute into something much larger and more meaningful. It represented the kind of monarchy that she and William hoped to lead someday, one that was both respectful of tradition and responsive to contemporary needs. The dress rehearsal, held just 3 days before the actual service, exceeded even Kate's highest expectations. The Abbey was filled with music that seemed to embody the very best of human creativity and spiritual aspiration. Representatives from dozens of nations stood together, their voices blending in harmonies that transcended linguistic and cultural differences. Standing in the royal box and listening to this extraordinary choir, Kate felt the presence of the Queen almost tangibly. This was indeed what Elizabeth II would have wanted. Music speaking when words could not, bringing together her beloved Commonwealth in celebration of shared values and common hope. The morning of December 15th dawned crisp and clear over London, with a thin layer of frost covering the grounds of Westminster Abbey like nature's own blessing for the day ahead. Kate woke before dawn in apartment 1A at Kensington Palace, her mind immediately racing through the final details that needed attention. She had barely slept, not from anxiety, but from the kind of excited anticipation that comes when months of careful planning are about to become reality. William was already awake beside her, quietly reviewing his speech notes in the early morning light. They had developed a comfortable ritual over their years of marriage for managing pre-event nerves. Silent companionship in the early hours, shared breakfast with the children, and then separate preparation time before coming together again as a united front for public appearances. "Are you ready for this?" William asked softly, setting aside his papers and turning his full attention to his wife. Kate smiled, an expression that mixed confidence with the slightest hint of nervous energy. "I think so. It feels like something she would have enjoyed, something that honors everything she believed about bringing people together." The children were unusually excited at breakfast, particularly Prince George, who had been given a special role in the service as one of the readers. At 9 years old, he was beginning to understand the significance of royal duties, but Kate had been careful to present his participation as an honor rather than an obligation. She wanted him to feel proud of his contribution without feeling burdened by expectations. Princess Charlotte, ever the perfectionist like her mother, peppered Kate with questions about the evening's schedule. Who would be sitting where? What would the music sound like? Would there really be people there from all over the world? Kate answered each question patiently, recognizing her daughter's genuine interest in the event's details. Even Prince Louis, at 4 years old, seemed to sense that this day was different from their usual routine. He had been practicing walking like a prince for weeks, which mostly involved standing up very straight and taking measured steps. Kate found his earnest preparation both endearing and touching, another reminder of how the Queen's influence continued to shape her great-grandchildren's understanding of duty and service. By mid-morning, Kate had moved into her professional preparation mode. Hair and makeup would take hours, but first came the strategic meetings with her private secretary, the palace communications team, and security officials. Every aspect of the evening had been planned and rehearsed, but Kate insisted on reviewing the timeline once more to ensure that nothing had been overlooked. The guest arrivals were scheduled to begin at 6 o'clock, with the service itself starting at 7:30. This timing would allow for live television coverage across multiple time zones, bringing the event to Commonwealth audiences from Canada to Australia. Kate had specifically requested that the television direction emphasize the diversity of the congregation and the warmth of the atmosphere rather than focusing exclusively on royal protocol. One of her final decisions involved the flowers for the Abbey. Kate had worked closely with florists to create arrangements that would honor the Queen's memory while avoiding overwhelming the space's natural beauty. White roses, the Queen's favorites, would be prominent, but they would be joined by flowers representing each Commonwealth nation. The result would be subtle but meaningful, visible to those attending in person while adding beauty for television viewers. The Commonwealth Choir members had been rehearsing all week, but Kate had insisted on one final practice session that afternoon. She wanted to hear the music in the space where it would actually be performed to ensure that the acoustics worked perfectly for both live and broadcast audiences. More importantly, she wanted to see these remarkable individuals once more before they took their places for the service. Walking into Westminster Abbey at 3 o'clock that afternoon, Kate was struck by the transformation that had taken place. The ancient stone walls seemed to pulse with anticipation, and the afternoon light filtering through the stained glass windows created an atmosphere that was both solemn and joyful. The Commonwealth Choir was already in position, their faces reflecting a mixture of nervousness and excitement that Kate recognized from her own emotional state. Gareth Malone caught her eye and nodded toward the choir. "They're ready, Your Royal Highness." More than ready. They understand what this means, not just for tonight, but for the future. As the choir launched into How Great Thou Art, Kate felt the same overwhelming emotion that had moved her during the previous rehearsals. These voices, representing millions of people across the Commonwealth, were creating something beautiful together. The harmonies seemed to embody everything the Queen had believed about unity and diversity, about the possibility of different traditions enriching each other rather than competing. Maria Tangaroa, the Maori teacher from New Zealand, had brought 3 of her most talented students as they sang a verse in their native language. Kate was reminded of the Queen's last visit to Auckland, when Elizabeth II had listened intently to traditional Maori welcomes and had spoken about the importance of preserving indigenous cultures within the Commonwealth family. The Bushfire Community Choir from Australia added their voices to the familiar carol, but their contribution carried extra weight. These were people who had lost so much but had found strength in community and music. The Queen had followed their recovery efforts closely, sending personal messages and donations that had helped rebuild their lives. As the rehearsal concluded, Kate took a moment to speak with the choir members individually. These conversations had become one of her favorite aspects of the entire project. Each person carried stories about their homeland, their communities, and their encounters with the Queen's legacy that added depth and meaning to the evening ahead. Sarah Mitchell, the Welsh nurse who had received personal encouragement from the Queen during the pandemic, shared how participating in the choir had helped her process her own grief. "Singing together like this, it's like we're carrying forward her spirit of service," Sarah explained. "She always made people feel seen and valued, and that's what this choir does too." By early evening, Kate was back at Kensington Palace for her final preparations. The dress she had chosen was elegant, but accessible, a deep midnight blue that would photograph well, but wouldn't overshadow the service itself. Her jewelry included the pearl earrings that had belonged to the Queen, a subtle but meaningful connection to the woman they were honoring. As Kate's stylist made final adjustments to her appearance, she reflected on how much she had grown since joining the royal family 11 years earlier. The nervous young woman who had struggled with public speaking and formal protocols had evolved into someone capable of conceiving and executing an event of this magnitude. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, but it had been steady and purposeful. The drive from Kensington Palace to Westminster Abbey took place through streets lined with well-wishers. Kate was touched to see how many people had gathered despite the cold December evening, many carrying small candles or wearing items that honored the Queen's memory. The public response to the carol service had been overwhelmingly positive, with ticket requests far exceeding the Abbey's capacity. Arriving at Westminster Abbey, Kate was greeted by the Dean and the Archbishop of Canterbury. Both men had been instrumental in helping her shape the service's liturgical elements, ensuring that the celebration remained rooted in Anglican tradition while embracing the diversity she hoped to showcase. "The energy is quite remarkable tonight, Your Royal Highness," the Archbishop observed as they walked through the Abbey's entrance. "People understand that this is something special, something that goes beyond the usual ceremonial events." Kate could see what he meant as soon as they entered the main nave. The congregation was already beginning to arrive, and the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Unlike many royal events where protocol created distance between different groups of guests, tonight felt different. Government ministers were chatting with community volunteers, Commonwealth High Commissioners were comparing notes with local charity workers, and the barriers that usually existed in such formal settings seemed to have dissolved. The royal family began arriving just after 6:30. King Charles III entered with Queen Consort Camilla, both clearly moved by the sight of the Abbey filled with such a diverse and engaged congregation. Charles had been particularly supportive of Kate's vision for the service, understanding instinctively how it honored his mother's memory, while pointing toward the kind of monarchy he hoped to lead. Prince William arrived with the children, all of them looking appropriately formal but comfortable. George carried himself with the dignity appropriate for his future role, while Charlotte and Louis seemed excited to be part of such a significant event. Kate felt a surge of pride watching her family take their places, understanding that this moment would become part of their children's memories of learning to serve others. As 7:30 approached, the Abbey fell into expectant silence. Kate took her place with the royal family, but she could see the Commonwealth Choir preparing for their entrance. These individuals had traveled thousands of miles to be here, representing not just their own nations, but the Queen's vision of what the Commonwealth could become. The opening notes of "O Come, All Ye Faithful" filled the ancient space, but this wasn't the familiar version that most Christmas services featured. The Commonwealth Choir had arranged the carol to incorporate musical traditions from across the globe, creating harmonies that reflected the diverse heritage of the modern Commonwealth. As the service began, Kate felt a profound sense of completion. Months of planning, countless meetings, and careful coordination had led to this moment when music truly was speaking where words could not. The Queen's belief in the power of bringing people together was being demonstrated in real time, before an audience that spanned continents and cultures. The first reading, delivered beautifully by Prince George, focused on the theme of service. Kate had worked with him to understand the passage's meaning, helping him connect the biblical text to his great-grandmother's example of dedication to others. His clear, young voice carried through the abbey with confidence that made both his parents beam with pride. Between the readings and carols, the Commonwealth Choir showcased the incredible diversity of musical traditions that the Queen had encountered during her reign. Indigenous songs from Canada, gospel harmonies from Jamaica, classical arrangements from India, and folk melodies from Scotland blended together in ways that celebrated difference while creating unity. One of the most powerful moments came when the entire congregation joined together for "The Lord's My Shepherd," the hymn from the Queen's wedding. The voices of world leaders, community volunteers, children, and elderly citizens combined in a sound that seemed to embody the very best of human fellowship. As the service moved toward its conclusion, Kate realized that something extraordinary had been achieved. This wasn't just a successful royal event. It was a demonstration of what the modern monarchy could accomplish when it embraced its role as a force for bringing people together rather than setting them apart. As the Commonwealth Choir took center stage for their featured performance of Servant's Song, Kate felt time slow in that mysterious way that happens during truly transcendent moments. The voices that rose through Westminster Abbey carried more than melody. They carried stories of lives touched, communities served, and dreams inspired by a woman who had dedicated 70 years to something larger than herself. Maria Tangaroa stepped forward for her solo verse, her rich contralto voice carrying the Maori words that honored both her heritage and the Queen's memory. Kate had learned that Maria's grandmother had been present during one of the Queen's early visits to New Zealand in the 1950s, creating a connection across generations that made this moment even more meaningful. As Maria sang, her three young students provided harmonies that seemed to bridge the ancient traditions of their people with their hopes for the future. The camera crews, positioned discreetly throughout the abbey, were capturing every nuance of the performance for the global television audience. Kate had insisted that the broadcast should feel intimate rather than ceremonial, showing viewers the faces of individual singers rather than focusing exclusively on wide shots of the formal setting. She wanted people watching at home to connect with the personal stories represented by each voice. From Australia, the Bushfire Community Choir added their verses with voices that carried the weight of loss and the strength that comes from rebuilding together. Their choir director, a woman named Janet who had lost her own home in the fires, had told Kate that participating in this service felt like completing a circle of healing. The Queen's messages during our darkest days reminded us that we weren't alone, Janet had explained. Tonight, we're reminding others that they're not alone either. The Caribbean gospel singers brought an energy that transformed the traditional Anglican atmosphere of Westminster Abbey. Their arrangement of the hymn incorporated call-and response elements that encouraged participation from the entire congregation. Kate watched as dignified government ministers found themselves swaying to the rhythm, and she saw elderly members of the House of Lords clapping along with obvious enjoyment. But perhaps the most moving moment came when the Indigenous singers from Canada took their turn. Their contribution honored both their traditional songs and the complex relationship between Indigenous peoples and the Crown. Kate had worked carefully with community leaders to ensure that their participation felt authentic rather than tokenistic, understanding that reconciliation required genuine respect rather than symbolic gestures. The young leader of this group, a woman named Grace whose grandmother had attended residential schools, had initially been hesitant about participating. Her eventual decision to join the choir represented a generous act of bridge building that Kate deeply appreciated. As Grace sang in her native Cree language, translating words about forgiveness and hope for new beginnings, many in the congregation found themselves moved to tears. Between the musical performances, readings continued to weave together themes of service, dedication, and community. Kate had personally selected each passage, working with religious advisors to find texts that would resonate across different faith traditions while maintaining the Christian framework of the service. The readings came from the Bible, but also from Commonwealth poets and writers whose words had meant something to the Queen during her lifetime. When Princess Charlotte stepped forward to read a poem about kindness, Kate felt her heart swell with maternal pride. At 7 years old, Charlotte was beginning to understand what it meant to be part of the royal family, but she approached her public duties with a natural grace that reminded many observers of her great-grandmother. The poem she recited had been one of the Queen's favorites, discovered in Elizabeth II's personal papers after her passing. The television audience was estimated at over 200 million people across the Commonwealth and beyond, making this one of the most widely watched royal events since the Queen's funeral. But Kate had structured the service to feel intimate and personal, even for viewers thousands of miles away. The cameras lingered on faces in the congregation, capturing the genuine emotion and engagement that made the service feel like a gathering of friends rather than a formal state occasion. Prince William delivered the evening's main address, speaking about his grandmother's belief in the power of service to transform both individuals and communities. His words were carefully crafted but delivered with obvious personal emotion, drawing on childhood memories of conversations with the Queen about duty, dedication, and the importance of putting others first. "My grandmother often said that we are only as strong as our weakest member," William told the congregation. Tonight, as we listen to voices from across the Commonwealth, we hear evidence of her belief that every person has something valuable to contribute. These singers represent millions of people who serve others quietly, without recognition or reward, following the example she set for all of us. The Commonwealth Choir's final performance brought together all the individual groups for a combined arrangement of How Great Thou Art, the Queen's personal favorite hymn. The sound was overwhelming in its beauty and power, with voices representing dozens of nations blending in harmonies that seemed to embody everything the Commonwealth aspired to become. Kate had positioned herself where she could see both the performers and the congregation's reaction. The diversity in the Abbey was remarkable, young and old from every corner of the globe, representing different faith traditions and cultural backgrounds, all united in this moment of shared celebration. She thought about the Queen's Commonwealth Day messages over the decades, always emphasizing that diversity was a source of strength rather than division. One of the evening's most touching moments came during the prayers, when representatives from different Commonwealth nations offered brief intercessions in their own languages. Kate had suggested this element as a way of acknowledging that while English served as the Commonwealth's common language, the spiritual life of its peoples was expressed in dozens of different tongues. A young woman from Sri Lanka offered prayers in Tamil, her voice carrying the musical quality of her native language. A man from Ghana spoke in Shwi, his deep voice resonating through the Abbey with words of gratitude and hope. From India came Sanskrit phrases that connected the modern Commonwealth to ancient traditions of wisdom and spiritual seeking. As each prayer was offered, the congregation responded with amen, regardless of language barriers, creating a powerful demonstration of shared faith transcending cultural differences. Kate noticed that several Commonwealth High Commissioners were visibly moved by hearing their native languages spoken in this sacred setting. The collection during the service was designated for charities across the Commonwealth that embodied the Queen's commitment to service. Instead of traditional plates being passed, the congregation was invited to contribute to organizations working in education, healthcare, environmental protection, and community development. Kate had insisted that every donation, regardless of size, should be acknowledged as a meaningful contribution to continuing the Queen's work. Children from a London primary school that had been visited by the Queen during her final years presented the offertory gifts. These youngsters, representing the future generation that would inherit the Commonwealth, carried bread, wine, and flowers to the altar with the kind of seriousness that children bring to important occasions. Their teacher had prepared them by explaining that they were participating in something that would be remembered for decades to come. As the service moved toward its conclusion, Kate felt a deep sense of accomplishment that went beyond the successful execution of a complex event. She had created something that truly honored the Queen's memory while pointing toward the future of the Commonwealth and the monarchy itself. The evening had demonstrated that royal events could be both dignified and accessible, traditional and innovative, formal and heartfelt. The final hymn, Jerusalem, was sung by the entire congregation with an enthusiasm that surprised even Kate. This beloved English anthem, with its vision of building something beautiful and lasting through dedicated work, seemed to capture the spirit of what everyone had experienced together. The voices of cabinet ministers blended with those of community volunteers, creating a sound that embodied the democratic ideals that the Queen had supported throughout her reign. As the last notes faded and the congregation began to stand for the final blessing, Kate caught sight of several choir members wiping away tears. The emotional impact of the evening was evident throughout the Abbey, from the youngest children present to the most senior dignitaries. Something profound had been shared, something that connected people across all the barriers that usually divided them. The Archbishop of Canterbury's closing blessing specifically honored the Queen's memory while commissioning everyone present to continue her work of service in their own communities. His words were broadcast live to the Commonwealth, carrying the message that the Queen's legacy lived on through the actions of ordinary people doing extraordinary things for others. King Charles III stood to offer brief remarks at the service's conclusion, his voice thick with emotion as he thanked Kate for creating an event that so perfectly captured his mother spirit. "Tonight we have heard the Queen's voice," he said simply. "It speaks through every act of service, every gesture of kindness, every effort to build bridges rather than walls. My mother would have been deeply moved by what has happened here tonight, and deeply grateful for the love that has been shared." As the royal family processed out of the Abbey, followed by the Commonwealth Choir and the broader congregation, Kate felt the weight of what had been accomplished. This wasn't just another successful royal event. It was a template for how the monarchy could engage with the modern world while honoring its deepest traditions. The evening's impact was already becoming clear through social media responses and early news coverage from around the world. The hashtag Commonwealth Carols was trending globally, with people sharing their own stories of service and community inspired by what they had witnessed. Outside Westminster Abbey, crowds had gathered to catch glimpses of the participants as they departed. Many were still singing carols, their voices carrying the evening's spirit into the London streets. Street vendors were selling candles and programs, and the atmosphere felt celebratory rather than solemn. As Kate's car pulled away from the Abbey, she saw Maria Tangaroa embracing Sarah Mitchell, the Welsh nurse, while children from different countries exchanged contact information with their parents' help. The connections made that evening would continue long after the formal event concluded, creating networks of friendship and cooperation that embodied the Queen's vision for the Commonwealth's future. 3 weeks after the carol service, Kate stood in her private sitting room at Kensington Palace, surrounded by thousands of letters, emails, and messages that had poured in from around the world. The response had been overwhelming, not just in volume, but in the depth of emotion and gratitude expressed by people from every corner of the Commonwealth and beyond. What had begun as a tribute to Queen Elizabeth II had become something much larger, a catalyst for conversations about service, community, and the possibility of bringing people together in an increasingly divided world. The letter that had moved Kate most deeply came from an elderly woman in Jamaica named Hyacinth Brown, who had been present during one of the Queen's visits to Kingston in the 1960s. Hyacinth wrote in careful handwriting about how the carol service had reminded her of that long-ago day when, as a young teacher, she had been selected to present flowers to the Queen. "Your Majesty spoke to me about my work with children," Hyacinth's letter recalled. She remembered my name when she saw me again 20 years later. That night at the Abbey, hearing those beautiful voices, I felt like she was still with us, still bringing us together. Similar stories arrive daily. A nurse from Canada wrote about how watching the service with her teenage daughter had sparked conversations about service and dedication that they had never managed to have before. A teacher from Australia described how his students had been inspired to organize their own community choir after watching the Commonwealth singers perform together. Perhaps most significantly, dozens of organizations reported increased volunteer applications and donations in the weeks following the carol service. Food banks, homeless shelters, literacy programs, and environmental groups across the Commonwealth experienced what media outlets dubbed the carol effect, a surge of interest from people who wanted to turn their emotional response to the service into concrete action. Kate had anticipated that the event would be meaningful for those who attended, but she hadn't expected this kind of sustained impact on communities worldwide. The letters and reports arriving daily suggested that the service had tapped into a deep hunger for connection and purpose that many people felt but rarely had the opportunity to express. The royal family's Christmas celebrations that year carried special significance because of the carol service's success. At Sandringham, the traditional holiday gathering included extended conversations about how the monarchy might build on what had been accomplished. King Charles III had been particularly thoughtful about the implications, understanding that Kate had not just organized a successful event, but had demonstrated a new model for royal engagement with contemporary society. "What you achieved that night," Charles told Kate during a quiet moment at Sandringham, "was something my mother always hoped for but rarely saw. You created a space where people felt genuinely connected to each other and to something larger than themselves. That's the essence of what the Commonwealth should be." The international media coverage had been uniformly positive, but more importantly, it had focused on the service's deeper meaning rather than treating it as merely a ceremonial spectacle. Journalists from Commonwealth nations wrote extensively about how the evening had rekindled their own connection to the broader Commonwealth community. A particularly insightful article in the Globe and Mail of Canada described how the service had reminded us that the Commonwealth is not an abstract political concept, but a living community of people who share values and aspirations across all our differences. Similar pieces appeared in newspapers from Australia to South Africa, each finding different aspects of the evening that resonated with local audiences. The BBC's documentary about the service, broadcast in February, revealed behind-the-scenes footage of the preparation and rehearsals that had made the evening possible. Kate had agreed to be interviewed for the program, sharing her thoughts about why the tribute had felt so important and how it had evolved from a simple idea into something much more ambitious. "The Queen always said that the Commonwealth's greatest strength was its people," Kate explained to the documentarians. She believed that when people from different backgrounds come together around shared values, they can accomplish remarkable things. That's what we experienced that night at Westminster Abbey, and it's what I hope we can continue to build upon. The documentary also featured interviews with Commonwealth choir members, revealing the profound impact that participating in the service had on their own lives and communities. Maria Tangaroa had returned to New Zealand with plans to create an exchange program between Maori students and Indigenous young people from Canada and Australia. The Bushfire Community Choir was working with similar groups across the Commonwealth to share songs and stories of resilience. Sarah Mitchell, the Welsh nurse, had become an advocate for international healthcare cooperation, using her experience in the choir to build connections between medical professionals across Commonwealth nations. Singing together created bonds that we're now using to share knowledge and support each other's work, she explained in her interview. The success of the carol service influenced planning for other royal events throughout the following year. The traditional Commonwealth Day service at Westminster Abbey was redesigned to incorporate some of the same inclusive elements that had made Kate's tribute so powerful. The annual Royal Garden Party invitations were expanded to include more community volunteers and grassroots organizations. Most significantly, plans began developing for an annual Commonwealth Carol service, with different nations taking turns hosting the event. Kate's one-time tribute was evolving into an ongoing tradition that could strengthen connections across the Commonwealth while honoring the Queen's memory year after year. The impact on Kate's own role within the royal family was profound but subtle. She had always been respected for her dedication and professionalism, but the carol service established her as someone capable of visionary leadership. Palace staff noticed that her opinions carried more weight in planning discussions, and her suggestions were sought out for events beyond her traditional areas of responsibility. William watched his wife's growing confidence with pride and admiration. During a private conversation several weeks after the service, he told her, "You found your voice in a way that honors everything that came before while pointing toward something new. That's exactly what this institution needs." The children have been deeply affected by their participation in the service and by witnessing its impact. Prince George spoke frequently about wanting to organize similar events when he was older, showing an early understanding of how royal duties could be both personally meaningful and publicly valuable. Princess Charlotte had become fascinated with learning about different Commonwealth nations and their cultures, asking for books and documentaries that would help her understand the diversity within the royal family's extended community. Even Prince Louis, despite his young age, seemed to grasp that the evening had been special. He continued to practice his royal walk and often asked when they would next see the singing friends who had come from so far away. The Commonwealth Choir members maintained contact with each other through social media and video calls, creating an ongoing network of friendship that transcended national boundaries. Several smaller reunion concerts were organized in various Commonwealth capitals, keeping alive the spirit of musical collaboration that had been so powerful at Westminster Abbey. Kate received regular updates about these continuing connections, and she began to envision ways that future royal events could build upon the relationships that had been established. The traditional model of royal tours, focused primarily on ceremonial meetings with government officials, might be expanded to include more substantive engagement with community groups and grassroots organizations. The Queen's death had initially felt like an ending, the conclusion of an era that could never be replicated. But the carol service demonstrated that Elizabeth II's legacy was actually a beginning, a foundation upon which new traditions and connections could be built. The values she had embodied, service, dedication, and bringing people together, were not limited to her personal example, but could be lived out by others in ways that reflected contemporary realities. As spring arrived and Kate began planning for the year ahead, she carried with her the confidence that came from having created something truly meaningful. The nervous uncertainty that had characterized her early years in the royal family had been replaced by a clear sense of purpose and possibility. Looking back at the hundreds of letters still arriving weekly, Kate felt profound gratitude for the opportunity to serve in a role that could bring out the best in people from around the world. The carol service had been conceived as a tribute to Queen Elizabeth II, but it had become something more, a demonstration that the human capacity for connection and service was limitless when people were given the opportunity to express it. The Queen's own words continued to guide Kate's thinking about future projects. Music speaks when words cannot. That December evening at Westminster Abbey, music had indeed spoken, carrying messages of love, hope, and unity that continued to resonate months later. As Kate planned for years to come, she remained committed to creating more opportunities for voices to be heard, for communities to connect, and for the Queen's vision of a Commonwealth united in diversity to become an ever deeper reality. The The carol service had proven that royal events could be both traditional and transformative, formal and heartfelt, dignified and deeply human. It had established a new template for how the monarchy might engage with the modern world while honoring its most precious traditions. Most importantly, it had demonstrated that Queen Elizabeth II's greatest legacy was not any particular institution or ceremony, but the example she had set of dedicated service to others and the belief that bringing people together was always more powerful than allowing them to remain apart. Years later, when historians looked back at this pivotal moment in the monarchy's evolution, they would recognize the carol service as more than a successful royal event. It would be remembered as the moment when a new generation of royal leadership found its voice, when tradition and innovation came together in perfect harmony, and when the Commonwealth truly began to sing as one.